Good morning, everyone. 5 years, 10 semesters, one final battle, the design dissertation. Thesis is the culmination of learnings that we acquire over 10 semesters. In our near future, all of us will be fighting this battle some or the other day. Today, we are here to witness the journeys and experiences of this final endeavor from the recently graduated batch of 2015-2020. This gathering is an attempt to celebrate not only the successful outcomes, but also the different processes and experiments that we have led to the conclusion of their academic universe. On behalf of Academy of Architecture, I welcome you all to Thesis Symposium 2020. We'll now begin with our first speaker. He is Sagar Parab, with his thesis titled Parle Biscuit Factory, Memory, Legacy, and the City. The design idea focuses on the city of Mumbai, which is under constant upgradation. In this process of upgradation, how an identity of a place is formed and what role does memory of a place play in formation of those identities is explored. Memory of place is different for different people, but what makes a place memorable? The site under question for the thesis is Parle Biscuit Factory, a place which has been part of neighborhoods for decades. I now hand over the symposium to Sagar.
Good morning to all, and thanks for having me. Before I begin, I just wanted to tell you how I approached my thesis. Like before coming to the design stage, how I went from the book jury or the site visits or the general explanation of ideas to making a proper design which will be site specific also, which will cater to city as a whole, as well as thinking of something unique. So I think most of you must be having that in mind, like how should I begin with making a design? Like I had this similar kind of fear. Like my site was a 10-acre site, and many of my faculties told me that why are you taking such a big site? You won't be able to complete it within a given time. Of course, COVID helped me quite a lot, but that's a different topic. But yeah, at the end, the outcome is up to you. So it's entirely up to you how you start your design process, how you culminate your design, and first of all, always follow your gut feelings. Never tell any, like you will get disheartened when a faculty tells you that your design is not good enough, or you should try something different which you don't want to do. Of course, listen to the ideas that your faculty tell you, but at the end it's your thesis, so you only have to do, and you know your site better than anyone else. So I think that's my basic starting remark. So I would like to start with my presentation now.
Yes.
So as told earlier, my site was Parla Biscuit Factory, and the reason why I chose this site is like first the basic topics, as was told by that. I started with the memory, identity of a place, and how different words like client, adaptation, future, everything will focus and culminate down towards a design. So from all that, I came to the site of Parla Biscuit Factory. So before coming to the site, there was also many personal reasons for this. So since my childhood, my Nana stays near Warsaw station. So I always used to cross this Parla Biscuit factory bridge and used to smell the biscuit of the biscuits in the factory, the production area, and the experience of it always remained with me throughout my childhood. And also like me, many of the people had visited the factory in their childhood, had experienced the factory in one way or the another. It was a different kind of experience for different people living around the area, as well as crossing the area, or the for the people whose livelihood depend on the factory. So before coming to the site, uh, like I explored how my personal experience. Many people might be having similar kind of experiences. So I started interviewing people. Like I interviewed around 50 to 60 people around the site, also people around Mumbai. Everyone had their opinion of the factory and how they felt sad that it closed, and everyone were thinking what is going to happen to that area. Everyone thought that they would just demolish the factory and then make a like a housing colony there, and like the identity of the place, the memory of that people had for the place will get vanished. So my basic focus started with retaining the memory of a place, as well as structures that are on the site. So before starting with the design process, I analyzed on the site what structures that I can maintain, like what are the like different areas that I can reuse. And before coming towards the program, these three categories, like the memory, requirement of the site, and requirement of the client, these three different things were culminated together in one part. So for formation of program, like my program included a working space, a museum, public areas, and a connecting pathway in between the passages of the factory. So uh, many, like I had initial doubts like how I can make like a public space along with a office space which is like a very private sealed space. So as I went through my design, I got the idea like how this is a 10-acre site, so I can like divide it into different parts, different areas, and uh, different areas. So basically, these were the existing conditions of the site, and these four characters are the four stories of the site that I thought were like the common points between the interviews that I took. So some people from the area in the slums around it had never seen the factory, but had imagined the factory like Willy Wonka's chocolate factory or something like that. And for the people living around in the buildings, many of them had visited the factory in their childhood, or many of their livelihood depended on the factory. And in third one were the visits for the people from different areas throughout Mumbai or even throughout Maharashtra. Many of the people came here to visit just this factory, because this was the first factory that was started by Parle Products in the year 1929. So these culmination of memories help me further in making like how I'll go towards my program, how I can make this like a small co-working space for the people, what requirements people need for a small experience center as you walk through the site. So these were like the objects of memories that I thought will help me in designing. So before starting my design process, like making the plans and everything, thought of making like these small axos, which will help me understand the imagination of what people thought about the factory and what I want to take further from those thoughts. And yeah, so for the final area, for the final design, I came towards like a culmination of all these activities, like how I can make like a co-working space which is sealed off from the entire public areas, but still you can give an access to the factory and maintain like functions like restaurants and everything at the start, or also reusing the elements from the factories that are demolished. Like some salvaging was also important part of my thesis. So how I included the ISMB beams that were demolished from the factories and reused as a different folly areas. So as you walk through the factory, you get the experience of a, you get that industrial feel throughout the areas as you walk. So everything that I thought initially, I kept on including in one way or the another. So while designing throughout the process, even if I designed a view, I designed a plan, section, uh, everything I had in my mind was my initial idea of the memory of a place. So then memory of place is different for different people. So this experience and the culmination of this experience was what I focused on my thesis. So yeah. So any questions? Yeah.
Yes, Sagar. So from audience, anybody has any questions for Sagar?
Hello, hi.
Hello.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
wanted to ask. So, if you knew that for every person the idea and the memory of the place is completely different, so how did you decide to deal with like all the like how do you सबको same memory कैसे you want to associate? Like how did you deal?
Yeah.
अगर मेरे को memory
So
अलग है तो अलग कैसे experience
okay.
मिलेगा मुझे? That's what I was.
So for that, I made like a chart from different people's experience. Like when I interviewed 50 people, everyone had a different memory, but what they wanted to do with the place kind of had a similar idea. And those experience can be culminated into the four actors that I showed. So like one was the visit to the factory, one was the smell of the area or the experience of the area as they passed around the factory, or one was their visit from the childhood. So these were the major pointers that I wanted to cater through my thesis. and those major pointers were what I took ahead. So yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I guess there are
Okay.
no more. So, Sagar, if asked to advise your juniors in one sentence out of your five experience, what that sentence would be?
You can't define 5 years experience in one sentence, but yeah, don't get depressed with your thesis if it doesn't turn out good for like the faculty. The thesis is just for you. It's their opinion matters through design point of view, but at the end, you know how much effort you put into your thesis. So never get depressed by juror or anything. Take their advice, but never get depressed.
Yep. Thank you, Sagar.
Okay, thank you.
Our next speaker for today's symposium is Anisha Mehta. Her thesis is titled as Prison of an Imagined Order. This thesis is an investigation into the potential of an architectural volume towards the recognition of confinement and making one feel captive. It looks at retaining the nature of punishment in the spatial character while bringing in the idea of normality for the prisoners in their daily activities to make the prisoner feel captive. The thesis gives a proposal to redesign 40 acres of the prison based on an order to complete normalcy which marries the totalitarian rule of the prison authority. Anisha, we would request you to take over the symposium.
Yes, thank you for the introduction. And hi, guys. Uh, I'm going to try and make it less about my design and more about my journey. So I have a lot of things to pass in terms of like how you would actually approach a thesis. Is this visible?
Yes, Anisha, you can go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So, firstly, there are a lot of dogmas related to how you do a thesis, and a lot of people would have already passed on information to you regarding, like, this is the time you have to prove yourself, or this is your only time to do something new, etc. So, something in line with that, like, this is something I want to share with you all. Like, if you want to check your progress, like, if you're really doing something in line with what you had thought. Like, this is a graph that I found and I kind of tried to attribute it to thesis. So check your progress in terms of two things. One is horizontal and one is vertical. So by horizontal, I mean something which is very easy to imagine. Like if somebody gives you a brief of an institute, all you're going to do is retrofit and fit all the functions of an institute into a form or into a site. So that is something very easy to imagine, and we already know what it looks like. So you're going to borrow a lot of inspiration from existing institutes and probably try to imitate them. So, for example, like if you're given a typewriter and then you produce 100 of those units, that is horizontal. Versus thesis is your time where you can actually do some vertical progress, which something which is very hard to imagine, a path which is uncharted, and something which is never done before. So it's your time to create. So if somebody gives you a typewriter, but you actually turn it into a word processor, this is what you do with your thesis. Like you're given something very simple, or you choose something very simple as a problem that you see around, but what you create out of it has to be something which is very new, an approach to that problem. So this is something, so basically by horizontal I mean you're given one thing and you make n of those, but thesis is something where you're given zero, but from zero you go to one and then you go to two. So this is what I mean by like going vertical, and try to be a creator and not an imitator here. So this is something I want to pass with like general crux of thesis. Now coming to my design, basically a lot of people ask me, even my juror asked me why I took a topic so radical, and why was I interested in approaching problem of prisons or like of criminality. So like initially when I was trying to talk to myself and find my interests, I found out that I wanted to address a social issue through architecture, which is how I wanted to prove the potential of architecture for combating a social issue, which is when I came across something like a very compelling topic of imprisonment and punitive architecture and stuff, which is why I decided to choose my topic as studying imprisonment. So when I did my dissertation, I started, sorry, I started with introduction to prisons. Like I studied the whole history and typologies of prisons, architectural evolution of prison architecture. I was very fortunate to be able to enter 3 prisons. I actually went out of the way to get permissions. I went to a lot of I went to 2 criminal lawyers who gave me access to all these things, and like, go for it. This is your time. Like, do whatever you can to get the most unique and niche information that can help you to design in your topic. So I went all out with like my research phase, and then I went to a more deeper understanding of behavioral study. So what is it to become, like, what is it to be a prisoner? So I researched a lot on, like, ex-convicts who have come out of the prison, and a lot of blogs, and which is when I came to know that prison is like the only form of architecture which is so opposite of every other architecture. Like every other architecture tries to maximize output on people, but prison is something which is opposite. Like it makes the user suffer. So why would architecture, why as an architect we are trying to make a human feel miserable? So a lot of study about behavior. Then I tried to relate this whole situation to the COVID-19 situation, where we become the inmates in our house, like we ourselves become prisoners. So then I drew a lot of parallels with respect to a prison and what the society is. So all of this is very slightly on the sociological end, and slightly gets a little philosophical, which is when I arrive at my hypothesis, where I'm not trying to answer any questions, or I'm not trying to give, like, extreme solutions of making prison architecture more rehabilitative, nothing like that. It's basically, I want to explore the potential of architecture and a volume in making somebody feel captive. So I have punishment as a character in my architecture, but not in the activities. Like the prisoners are free to do normal things that we do at home and we do in our lives, but the architecture is what would make them feel captive. The architecture would secure itself, and they cannot escape out of it. So this was my hypothesis. Then I found the Yerwada Central Prison to be a very like a perfect site for this endeavor, because the whole site is a 63. This whole square that you see is a 63-acre land, the whole of square, and this is the existing architecture of Yerwada. So I actually like literally went on terraces of buildings around the site to get the pictures of the inside. So this is kind of illegal, but like, go for it. I pushed myself a lot to get whatever I wanted. Then so yeah, I studied the whole existing architecture, why something is the way it is. I'm not going to get you into all of that. Then I started doing my case studies with respect to the kind of architecture that would make someone feel captive. So my case studies were not of that of prisons. My case studies were those in which I found the architectural volume to be perfect to fit some kind of a function. So I went for a lot of things that involved grids, that involved steps, towers, labyrinths, and stuff like that, because I wanted to create this whole new order for prison architecture. So yeah, so my all my case studies were something where uh, like the architecture would make you feel so captive, like grids and this kind of a cruciform, or something like this kind of a square grid, or like a lot of these vessels of architecture that would probably make my prison. So these were my case studies. They were non-prison case studies. So this is the whole part where I was exploring the potential of architecture. Then I came to a conclusion of the kind of approach I want for my prison. And yes, this from here starts my design. So what I did was I retained this much of the prison that you see, and rest everything I redesigned for my for all the ideas that I had put across. So this is a 40-acre land that I redesigned. And the thing is, my design was very speculative. Like, you cannot probably imagine this on site to be built as it is, but it is basically a speculation of what architecture can do. So then I made a whole segregation matrix because there are a lot of types of prisoners. Uh, and yeah, so this is my design. Like, I had 7 different functions overall in my design, and then the same functions would then multiply to cover the site because I was catering to a population of 5,000 prisoners. So I had to repeat, like, my module had to repeat multiple times. It was a very dense typology. And yeah, I explored a lot with my representation too, trying to like animate things. So just a second. So yeah, here this shows like how I developed my whole site. Like, I had a plot, then I made axes, then I made grids, then I added, how I'm exploring one volume of architecture to make somebody feel confined. So this shows the progressive architectural volumetric study. And this is basically my whole design. Now, further, I'm gonna skip all of this. Further, I'm basically explaining in my design one part of the, like, one every each of the 7 parts of my design. So like, I'm actually gonna skip all of this. This is kind of too much into the design part. But yeah, I can say like, I can just show you quickly how, like, then I went into the depths of making them understand one part that I had designed. But before that, like, I actually oriented my jurors to why I had this kind of an approach and what made me think of something so different, and like, why was my prison not like every other prison that you see in the country right now. So yeah, a lot of all of that I'm gonna actually skip. And yeah, this was kind of like my final view that showed that basically my prison was trying to create an experimental community where, if you see, I'm trying to create architecture from where there is no escape. Like, the architecture ties you so much inside that architecture itself makes the prison so secure. Like, you don't necessarily need to lock the prisoner in one place, but the planning and the design is such that the prisoner cannot escape out of this. So and yeah, this was like my landing statement, that I was trying to do things that the government does not dare to. I was trying to confront that through architecture. Like, in like one of my parts of the design, I actually designed a brothel. So I was trying to basically prove a point how prisoners, because they don't come in contact with women, it increases the homosexual tendencies in them, which is why I actually incorporated a brothel. So this was very, very radical, even for my jurors. Like, they said, this is very bold a step, but I would say go for it. Like, if you think this fits your program and you think you can prove a point by that, like, go for it. So yeah, and then I concluded it with saying, when we break down our prison walls and run towards freedom, we are in fact running into a more spacious exercise yard of a bigger prison. This was my landing statement, in which I'm comparing that what is society? Like, society itself is another bigger yard of prison, because all our gated societies, offices, all of them are basically a setup where somebody is a ruling authority and we are being subverted by them. So this is how I ended my thesis. And yeah, so a lot of y'all would be at a point where y'all are working on your DD right now. So let me tell you, like, my DD, this is what I had given in my DD as my intent, where I'm gonna, like, my site was gonna be this much of the whole complex, but I actually landed up taking the exact opposite of it. Like, what I gave in my DD actually was not the end of it. So don't worry. Like, if you're proposing something in your book and eventually you find out that, no, I want to do much more than this, and I want to do like slightly more different than what I had done out of my research, go for it. Like prove why you're doing that. And actually, like my mentor pushed me a lot to like I actually started with taking one part of the site, then I added another part. Then my mentor pushed me a lot to cover up the whole site, and he was like, why not? So don't limit yourself with a smaller site or a bigger site. Like let all of those decisions come out of a very informed research that you have done. And even in my DD, I had proposed something very different where I was trying to actually make a rehabilitative center and fellowship programs and after release care and stuff. But I ended up doing proper prison housing. Like I actually designed housing for the prisoners. I designed the entire surveillance and security system. So don't limit yourself with what you derive out of the book. When you're actually designing and you have to leave behind some things, don't hesitate. Like push yourself very hard. So yeah, so key learnings, I would say, like this is the best time to talk to yourself and keep questioning yourself regularly, because this is the best time to know your interests and let your thoughts let I used to be very consumed by thoughts of what is criminality, what is prison. I used to watch so many movies that would showcase this whole criminal realm, and let these thoughts engage you, and the output will follow by itself. Like, don't worry about the output. Let the thoughts first consume you so much that you, whatever you see, you think about your thesis. Like, so the next point is inspiration is everywhere. You just have to be observant. Like, I would go out and I would see some structure, but that would inspire me for my prison. So all I have to do is be observant about it and reference very smartly. Like, don't, if you're doing an institute or a play or a stadium or whatever, don't reference only institutes. Reference things that you would reference in terms of the architectural volume of things. Like, it's okay if you reference probably a residential complex for something very different, but reference very smartly. Like, take references from movies, from books, from things you observe, but don't just take very literal references. And the next is seek help. Like, I had two mentors who I would keep going to for my smallest doubts. So approach people, approach experts, don't hesitate, and don't get too attached to small accomplishments. As I told you, like in my DD, what I had done and what I did finally was very different. So don't get attached to small things that you accomplished. It's okay to discard ideas and move ahead. Like, it's all a part of the process. And if you make a point, like, don't make a point if you think it's cool or if you read on the internet saying, okay, this is what the trend is. Don't make a point just for the sake of it. Only if you can visualize a manifestation of that for your design, then make that point in your book. Like, just because you internet is so wide, like you will find so many things for your topic. So don't just make points because the points are very cool. Like, only if the point is actually going to fit into your idea of that space, then make it up, like then involve it in your book and in your research. So always, every point you should back it up with a visualization of it manifesting on site. And yeah, keep it like simple and believable. Like, have faith in your idea, even if you're trying to do something very contrarian. Go for it. Like, this is your only time, there's nothing to lose. Probably you might just lose a few marks, I don't know. That depends on your juror and probably the requirements. I mean, who cares? Nobody cares about marks. So yeah, this was my journey. And I'll tell you, my jurors actually commended me to take something so radical, and they said that they could actually visualize the whole thing on site just by the whole monochrome presentation, and the way it was conveyed right from the birth of the idea to the end of the manifestation. So make your presentation very, very attractive, very, very attractive in a way that you're conveying everything very crisp. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Anisha. So, guys, do we have questions for Anisha?
Yes.
Diksha?
Yeah. I'm just curious to know, like, what kind of people did you interview for the project? Because, like, prisoners as your main users of the space,
Yeah.
and how did you go about it? Because even in the thesis, we are getting like forms, Google forms to like interview normal people. But in your case, the space is so different, the users are so different. So I just like wanted to know, like, how did you go about it?
Yeah, so as I told you, like, firstly, honestly, like, before you send a Google form, think of who you want it to answer. Like, a lot of people did this in my class and have been doing it, where people just send out Google forms to the whole of college and, then kind of record their inputs to it. But I would say the best way of making a Google form is actually targeting the right users of your space or the right kind of people who would give you a very valid suggestion. So in my case, I didn't send a Google form at all because I know nobody knows about this. So what I did was I actually went one step ahead. Like my dad had had a friend who was a criminal lawyer. So I went and spoke to him. He gave me he helped me with giving me access to Yerwada prison. He gave me access to the Navi Mumbai prison. Then I'm a part of an NGO that does prison outreach. So I actually went inside the cell of a prison and spoke to those prisoners and took workshop with them. So in my initial 7-8 months of research, I was trying to find every opportunity where I can actually go and understand what prison is like and feel what the prisoners feel, because until you embody your users, you will not be able to design for them. So don't go for casual Google forms where you're sending it to everyone and taking everyone's opinion on it. Be very selective and very smart with whom you interview.
Yeah, thank you.
Om?
Yeah, I had a doubt. Is there a comparison between the existing order of a prison and the currently designed one? And what are the inferences from that as you're learning from the whole process?
Yeah, so when I was explaining about the site in my presentation, so you would have seen like these circles inside the existing architecture. So existing prison architecture is basically where it's so there are many typologies, but there is what my site had was it was a radial typology where the prisoners would be staying in this radial formation with a watchtower in the center. So the central watchtower would basically be the surveillance tower, and all the barracks would then radiate out of it. So basically, the watchtower could keep a watch on all the prisoners. But the barracks were also like there was nothing in the barrack. It was just four walls, no beds, no toilets, nothing. So I did a whole analysis of what are the pros and the cons of that kind of architecture, and then my design came as an informed decision of retaining few things of the spatial character but adding functions and adding another whole. So my whole security layer went on top, as in I had a whole latticing of bridges on top of my prisoner accommodation that would have a look down on the whole prisoner accommodation. So that was a whole concept called as panopticism and stuff like that. So uh, I showed them a whole study of what Yerwada is currently and then what I'm proposing. If you want, I can run you through that, but it's a lot of slides actually.
That's fine. Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a doubt. If I can go.
Sure.
Yeah. So with your DD inference in the book that you said that you were talking more about rehabilitation, while towards the end it comes on like what I would say the opposite end of the spectrum when you are proposing something that actually confines and very actively put someone in a box. So how were you able to justify it to people who knew your DD inference and took like a complete turn? So how did you justify that first to yourself as like a approach and self,
Yeah.
and then to the others who knew about your design?
So initially, when I did my research, no, and I went to all these places, I got very carried away with like these people are also humans, and how can you give them something so retributive to them, and how can they not live a normal life? So I got very carried away into giving them everything And I forgot the whole aspect of, okay, but punishment is also required. Like, they have wronged the society, which is why they have been put here in the first place. So when I ended my research, I ended on a note where I want to completely rehabilitate the prisoners, and I completely forgot about the imprisonment and the punishment aspect. Then we had this whole Wednesday module that happened in our class, and I was made aware by my mentor that you're completely neglecting an aspect about punishment in your whole idea. Then I started exploring into why the prisoners are given punishment for a certain reason. And I started exploring into how can I make them feel punished, at the same time let them live a normal life. So my hypothesis was punishment is not about locking somebody in four walls. Punishment should be something where you're getting to do all the things that a normal human does, so that when the prisoner goes back to the society, he can lead a normal life. But at the same time, when he's in the prison, the architecture is such that it should make him feel confined. The architecture should make him feel that he's a part of this whole another ecosystem where he has to get corrected first. So which is why I had a lot of things, like I had a tower. So that tower is called as, like, it was a surrealistic approach where the tower is called Tower of Realization. So a prisoner would go up the tower and see the whole prison from top and understand what he has become a part of. But because on eye level, when a prisoner is on the ground, he will not know the whole 40 acre that he is a part of, because there is so many grids and so many clusters and typologies happening that on an eye level, a prisoner will never be able to consume the whole site. All he knows is he's captive in a place where he's able to live a normal life. Then on the tower, when he goes up, so there was a whole story I had created when who gets to go up, and the person would understand the whole ecosystem that he's a part of, which is so a lot. This is what I was saying. Like, when I was researching, I had neglected a few points which I had to incorporate in my design, which made it like this. And also, my design was a question on the society too, where like I was trying to question the whole society, where what the government does to us is exactly what a prison guard does to the prisoner. So how is the society and prison different? So in the end, I wanted to, like, there were a lot of food for thoughts I was giving the juror with uh, all these different ideas. So which is why my architecture then became something which was very captive.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, then I guess we'll move on to our next speaker. Thanks a lot, Anisha.
Yeah, thank you.
The next speaker we have is Nikhil Maniar, with his thesis titled Compact Revitalizing Act of Community Living in the Industrial Cluster of Morbi. The thesis intends to address the issue of migrant factory workers in industrial cluster of Morbi by developing a housing scheme and public amenities. The classification of workers is studied on basis of their family size, lifestyle, etc. Further on, the intent of the program is to foster interaction between these workers working in different factories within the same vicinity. The program is envisioned as a prototype which can be replicated within the ceramic cluster. I now request Nikhil to take over.
Okay, so hi. So am I audible?
Yes, Nikhil, you are.
Just 1 second, okay? I can't see my own self. So, okay. Anyways, um, so yeah, so my thesis, it basically talks about the community living in the industrial cluster of Morbi. So when you see the topic, it sounds like a mathematical equation, but it's actually very easy. It's actually talking about the act of community living in the industrial cluster of Morbi. And as the name suggests, compact, it basically talks about housing. And because the word compact itself tells you that it's talking about low cost housing. So when you talk about low cost housing, you have other aspects such as probably, it has to be again sustainable. It has to be you include aspects such as community living, etc. So my thesis is a very generic, a very straightforward thesis, but so I'll just like tell you all a little bit about what Morbi is before actually starting with the the process of it. So for it's actually a very small town and in Gujarat, and as you can see, it's located in near Jamnagar and Rajkot. So other than that, what happens is that you have so this town is actually the ceramic hub of the country. A lot of people do not know about this, and I personally did not know about this until and unless I started researching more and more. So the thing is that when you when I so for me, Morbi is not my hometown, but it's actually where my ancestors used to stay about 60, 70 odd years ago. And now the only reason that I used to visit it is for religious purposes. But so back in maybe in the first year or second year, that's when I visited it. That's when I actually got to know that Morbi is like there are these ceramic factories. So back then the idea was, I mean, during 2019 when I started my thesis, the idea was like, okay, we have to do some. I want to do something in Morbi only because I feel that there is some potential. So the initial ideas were, of course, because it's a ceramic cluster. So the first idea was that you try to revive the old ceramics. The second idea was that you try to have an expo center so that you have businessmen coming in out here. So but then I started researching a little bit about the city, the towns, and that's when I got to know that okay, there are about 900 units. And if you actually see, they have an export of over 12,000 crore rupees. So on further researching, and I got to know that okay, there are about 750 to 900 ceramic units, and you have a migrant force of 40,000 workers, of almost 40,000 workers, which is increasing day by day. And then you have these big brands known as Simpolo and REK. Of course, all of you all would have heard about it. And then again, you see that there's a lot of exports that is happening. So these are all snippets which I started finding as soon as I started looking at the town of Morbi. But on the same time, I was getting information as like migrants are facing problems. So like this is a very vague article probably you'll find, but this was actually one of the most one of the driving factors for me to decide or to get to intervene into the life of the migrant workers. So later on, again, when I started reading articles, I got to know that they have social exclusion, they're getting very poor wages, then they stay for a period of 10 years, but still their living scenario is pretty poor. So that's when I actually then luckily I was able to get the growth of the cluster. So if you compare it to 2005 and 2014, you obviously see that there's a lot of industrial growth. And then when you look at the proposed master plan, you see that okay, this is going to be a nightmare because there is going to be so much industrial activity. But if migrants, or if the crux of the industry group is the migrants or the factory workers, if they are facing problems, then you need to address that. Like someone needs to address that. So
Nikhil?
that's when yeah.
Yep. Sorry to interrupt. Are you presenting your screen?
You're not able to see it?
No, your screen is not visible.
Oh, okay. So I think there's a problem then. 1 second. Just 1 second.
Yeah, it's visible
Okay.
now. Yeah, we can see
Okay,
that.
sorry. So sorry. Okay. I just will brief you all a little bit about whatever I've said again. So again, the name, as it says, compact, is basically talking about community living in the industrial cluster of Morbi. Then this is just a tentative location as to where Morbi is in respect to Jamnagar and Rajkot. So for like a lot of people do not know about this place. And yeah, so these are the cluster snapshots that I was talking about, that you've got about 900 units, but out of that, you've got 12,000 crores actually exports. And you've got so many units, and you've got almost, you can say 90% of your workforce is migrant workers. Then when you're talking about stuff like, you've got Simpolo, RAK, you've got really big players which are known in the industry.
who are actually responsible for the manufacture. But at the same time, when we're talking about workers, what is the actual situation of theirs? Like these are again some snippets that I found, which I've already explained. And then finally, this is what I'm talking about, the growth of the cluster. So from 2005 to 2014, you see that there's a lot of industrial growth. And when you see the proposed growth, you actually see that, okay, this is going to be a nightmare. So if someone needs to address it, okay, you obviously want industrial growth, but at the same time you want it should be beneficial for everyone, not just for the for the user group, but for the person who's actually behind manufacturing the full thing. So this is a little bit part about my book, where I to justify why I'm looking at Gujarat or why I'm looking at the workers. So it started with an overview of migration. Then it started with what is the impact of migration, the impact of urbanization, and finally how I narrowed it down to Gujarat. And finally, what you see on your right is actually how in Rajkot you see that Morbi is responsible for or has the maximum number of people coming in for working. And if you see the bottom right graphic, you actually realize that you have it's mainly the sector is divided into construction material and electrical goods. So when you talk about construction material, it is basically ceramics. So yeah, so this was just a graphic from my end to explain what my idea was about this. So it was basically talking about uh,
Excuse
yeah,
me, Nikhil,
yeah.
excuse me. Are you still on the first slide? We are seeing the
No,
first
so
slide. We can only see
okay,
the first. Yeah. Okay. All
okay,
right. Now
that's
it's changed.
slightly,
It's changed. Thanks.
yeah,
Thanks.
because I don't know why that's happening. So now can you see slide 7?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, okay, I don't know why this is happening. So this was just an intent of showing what the town of Morbi is right now. So on the right hand side, you see that you've got the heritage structures, and on the left you see that there's a booming industrial cluster, and there's actually a bridge like this out there, which so this, again I'm trying to show that the migrants use this as a gateway to enter into the city. So again, what so this was all about my presentation, so I'm just going to go really fast through it. So what you see in the middle out here is actually your old town, and what you see on your right is actually an industrial cluster. So the idea is that the idea was that the city is no longer a small residential area with some commerce, but actually it's become a big booming industrial cluster, which actually defines what Morbi is now. So yeah, these are just some aerial views of the city, so or of the industrial cluster. So you see that it is a totally low-rise development, and it's dominated by factories. And again, this is along the highway. So, I mean, uh, and yeah, I've already mentioned all of this. So finally, the research question was that, how can architecture play an important role in improving the quality of life for the migrant factory workers? So this was before actually starting a research. So all my research is done on site, and all the data that is generated by me is all first-hand data with very little, because this particular site or this particular area has never ever been intervened before. So what you
Nikhil,
see out here, yeah.
I'm very sorry to interrupt again, but your slides are not changing. Can you present them?
Yeah, it's on presentation, and
Yes.
I mean, if you want, like, we can have Arzan present it first, and then I can again try and present it, because I
No, no,
mean,
we can.
you can see it now.
Yeah, we can see the slides moving. If you can put it, the PPT, if you can present it.
I mean, I'm presenting it only. I don't know why this is happening, because this has never happened before. See, it is showing it's presenting. Just one
Uh,
second.
we can see slide 19 right now. So we'll begin with Arzan with his thesis titled as Humanizing the High Rise. Cities today are bustling developments evolving as centers for social engagement, capital generation, and cultural amalgamation. Yet the higher we go, the more we lose touch with the ground, and the more inhuman this whole concept seems. or so we think. This project looks at the idea of humanizing the high rise through lenses of social and contextual interactions, changing the notion of high rise as more than just a tall glass box while attempting to bring back the human scale to high rise buildings. I now request Arzan to take over.
Hi everyone. Nice to see you all on a Saturday morning. uh, here, just a moment. I'll just start with the presentation. Is there a presentation that's come online?
Not yet.
Okay. All right. So the idea behind my thesis was essentially that I was super interested in high-rise buildings ever since I was a kid. So this was something that,
Arzan, we cannot see the screen still.
yeah, I'm just figuring it out. Just a moment. Okay, what about now?
Not still.
Okay.
Not yet. Not yet.
Yeah. Okay,
We have
there's
gremlins.
something. Yeah, there's something very funny with Google Meet. Moment.
We are sorry for this. We can. Hey, can you see the screen?
Yes. Yes, it started.
Arzan, can you take over from here, or do you want to change the slide?
Yeah, that's great. You can start with that.
Yeah.
Right. So the fundamental idea behind me taking up this project was essentially that I was extremely interested in high-rise buildings, and I wanted to see what I can do about them. When you look at a high-rise building, whether it's its scale, whether it's how you interact with the building, how you enter the building, there's so many things where you say that, okay, I can do things better, or this isn't acceptable. So that's how I started off with my project, with my research at least, about a year back. And that's when a lot of my research was actually tuned to the idea of how I could, me visiting buildings and seeing what's wrong with them, along with a lot of data that backed me up otherwise. So you have sick building syndromes, you have so many other things that actually come into place, which I found out during my research. So fundamentally, the idea that was able to come up with, Vedan, if you could go to the next slide. Yeah, great, thanks. So the when I was researching, this is one thing that actually I did come across, which you would realize that you don't see in high-rise buildings. So this is actually an excerpt from one of Charles Correa's essays. If you see in the top right, it actually talks about a blue dot with red dots, and eventually there's multiple blue dots and multiple red dots, and eventually so it's about how, when you increase the scale, the kind of interactions that you can have. And eventually in the last one, the blue dots influence the red dots to become purple as well. So there's this whole idea of how cities work, how cities integrate, and that's something that you don't see in high-rise buildings. One of the core things that actually drove my topic was, you don't find a library on the 20th floor for a reason, and you don't find if I'm sitting on one floor and there's someone right below me on the lower floor, I don't know that person. So even if I were to bump into them at the elevator, I mean, what are the odds? And those chance interactions are actually what make our spaces a lot better. I mean, there's a limitation to what an office can be, but how do you interact with someone else? And that's something that actually started driving the topic, that what are the humanizing factors and what are the dehumanizing factors. In my case, for me, I mean, my mentor actually guided me to start off with, okay, see what you can label first. So it's dehumanizing and then humanizing. A part of, because I was looking at a typology, there was also the question of the history of the typology. So what drove things, what's good and what's bad. One thing that I realized even halfway through my my research was that curtain walls aren't as bad as we think for high-rise buildings, because the kind of load that a conventional wall would give versus a conventional curtain wall is completely different. And for every ton that you can save in that much of span, that's lesser columns, that's lesser concrete, and that's so many different other things. So coming back to my topic, fundamentally, it was my idea after a lot of thinking. It was, okay, this is the idea I want to take ahead. I was able to categorize it into humanizing factors and dehumanizing factors, and then take things ahead from there. Uh, Eventually, one thing that I was able that I think needs to be done in thesis projects is that there should be a link from the start to the end, and that's something that was quite emphasized in me. So Vedan, if you could go to the next slide, please. Right. So there were always questions on, so these are images that basically show what it means to be a high rise today. Vedant, the next one, please. And the next. Right. So when we talk about density, when we talk about high-rise buildings, there's so much that can be done in terms of those humanizing factors. Towards the end of my research, I was actually able to culminate 5 major things that I could deal with. And those 5 points were what I could take ahead to calibrate in my project itself. So ideas of vertical chance interactions, ideas of scalability, permeability, adaptability, and and how does a building interact with the street interface. So those drove the project ahead. So Vedant, the next slide. Right. So as a part of my research, I'm extremely sorry, but I think someone's not on mute. There's a bit of a disturbance if you guys could. Thank you. Right. So if you do look at a conventional high-rise building, so what's wrong at the base level? What's wrong at the way in which the project interacts with different buildings? The moment you step into and even what's there in my first slide, basically when you walk into a building, you drive your car into the basement. You go from the basement, you step into an elevator, and from the elevator you go to your floor and you go to your office. maybe you know 30 people in your office if you're lucky, but you don't know the person on the other end of the floor, you don't know the person above you, you don't know the person below you, and what's worse is you don't get a chance to meet them. And that's something that sort of drives. So a part of the research also, so I had multiple site visits where I was able to actually look at what's good, what I could do things differently. An example in this slide is basically if you look at a large mask like a factory building, it's quite imposing. But if you break up that mask the way you'd see on certain streets, it doesn't feel that imposing. So Veena, if you could go to the next slide, please. Right. And accordingly, there were smaller and smaller little pieces that I could gather that I could change in buildings. Certain things that that I could connect later, and those reinforced those ideas. So from these ideas, I was able to get ideas. So like you'd see in the first one, what's wrong with a podium? What's wrong with a blank facade? How do you change things? What do you bring back? Another thing I realized in high-rise buildings is when you step out of the elevator, you're in your place, you're in your room, you're in your office. You don't know what season it is outside. You don't know whether it's raining. You're literally disconnected. So that drove me to take on different principles in how the whole project would go to. The next slide, please. And questions that when you look at different projects, I mean, why can't you have a window where why can't I have something like this in a high-rise building? What's wrong and what's not so wrong in that? How do you interact in high-rise buildings? This is a project that I was really motivated, not because you put trees on skyscrapers, but what impact do those trees have? And it's also, so if you look at, what is it that people value in a project? So at this point, I started actually, I believe at this point, my research was terminated and I started off with the project itself. So if you see on the next slide itself, it's about how these spaces can be different. What is it that draws you to these spaces? Factors of placemaking. How do I bring them together, and how do those points from my research? So what I came about fundamentally as chance interactions in high-rise buildings. How do I, and of course, these chance interactions are on the scale of neighborhood, they're on the scale of street level, city level, and so on and so forth. So that automatically impacted the entire programmatic way in which the project went on. And the next slide. Right. So the site that I chose was one of the few sites where you can actually build a high-rise building in Mumbai, because there's countless demand for that. And so a lot of these things also drove different questions of what is real estate? Why is it that you see a glass box coming up, and how can things go differently? So the site itself is quite interesting. If you see in the next slide, what's actually there is, right, this is the entire context of the site. So I chose an old mill site and how I could act. So because these are some places that have massive amounts of land to build on, and another part being that you can actually, that these places come in neighborhoods that are sort of warped with what's happening around. So you have the mills that close down, you have the neighborhoods that actually went ahead, and now you have the high rises that land up influencing what happens in the rest of the neighborhoods. Along the way, there were different factors, and factors like what you see in the second image on the left, is that with every high-rise building in Mumbai, with every mill land high-rise building in Mumbai comes a MADA housing that's a part of the government regulation. So how would I deal with that differently? Why are those things there? And all of that backtracked to humanizing the high-rise and what those 5 or 6 points were that I could take ahead. The next slide, please. Right. So, like I mentioned, scales of public interaction, social mixity. So these were the fundamentals behind the designs itself. So scales of interaction, neighborhood, street, cluster, unit levels, and what kind of interactions would happen. Social mixity. So I mean, you don't always need to have 5 BHKs on one floor and 4 BHKs on another. What I realized was even when you keep a large apartment where families would be living and a place where, let's say, a college student would be living, you'll end up going to the college student to take care of your kids when you're out for dinner, or to take care of your cat when you're out of town. So those smaller means of interactions, I mean, it's not about reinventing the wheel, it's about those smaller little pieces that help bring about a kind of change. The next slide. And so there were smaller, Vedant, you can run through these slides slowly, the next 4 or 5 slides. So these are smaller things in which what a conventional high-rise building, what my proposal would be, different kinds of vertical interactions. The diagrams say it all. What ways in which you would interact not only with people but with your surroundings, the adaptive, what happens at the base level. So a lot of these buildings land up. I mean, if you go to BKC, what's ironic is you have arcades, but you don't have people in those arcades because there's no activity to put them there. So that comes back into what happens at the base level. If you see in the next one, right, different means of vertical interactions, different offices, all sorts of things, and that just goes ahead. All of that comes from those ideas, those 5 or 6 ideas, drawing into the project later on. The next slide, please. Right. So again, how do you interact between neighbors? One thing that actually, when you can go to the next slide. Right. So what actually happened was I was able to take what is a conventional street and try to make it into a vertical street with a mix of programs. So programs don't necessarily mean, oh, I put a pharmacy on the 20th floor, I put something else, but ways in which those scales of interactions, I mean, what I realized was water coolers are the most effective in offices for people to meet and to have a conversation. So you don't need a big bar or a club or something that people are going to interact with. So again, the smallest scale to the largest scale and going about. I don't think I mentioned my project actually is a mixed use project because of the scale and because of what's happening. One part, so again, that everything goes back from what the project demands and what I can deliver accordingly. So the next slide, Vedant. Right. So these are all these smaller design aspects that I was able to do, generate from different ideas, so on and so forth. One part that was actually there was how do you enter the building? So when you do enter the building, you don't want to crawl into the basement like a raccoon and go up. So that was one of the factors that why do you want to do that? Why can't you just be dropped off and you walk into the building like a human being? So in this project, unless you have to get even the elevators from the basement land up terminating at the ground floor, and then from there you have to switch elevators and head up. All of that coming in mind, it's just that even you getting into an open aired lobby or one with natural light, that makes so much more of a difference. So the next slide, please. Right. Fundamentally, so these are two variations that actually got taken ahead. One, if you see on the left, that's actually fundamentally what's darkened is the building core. So high-rise buildings are known for their building cores. That's where your services, that's where elevators go. And one feature was actually splitting up the cores. That because that would mean different ways. So ideas like if you had multiple ways to get home on a street, you have multiple ways to get to your area on a given floor. I think you can glance through the next few slides. They're just, conventional drawings. Yeah, so you can go ahead. Right. This slide is actually a little important because this one actually looked at the kind of programmatic changes that happen and the kind of adaptability that happens at different levels. So if you're on the ground floor, the first floor, the second floor, the third floor, things change. And things should change because your context is changing. Suddenly I'm below the tree canopy and I'm above the tree canopy. And that just amplifies when you go to different heights because you have different winds coming in, you have a whole lot of different factors coming in, and automatically you look at things differently. I mean, the moment you're on the ground floor, you're interacting with your surroundings. You can see people. The moment you go up to higher floors, they become ants. So all of those factors were consciously chosen. What relating to the topic can I do differently? So yeah, you can go to the next slide, please. Right. So different contexts, different things changing at different levels. The next slide. And then eventually I was able to come into the project. There were parts of the project that I retained. So like I mentioned, it's an old mill site. I integrated a lot of factors into the project. So Number one, your public spaces aren't 9 to 5 public spaces with a compound wall. It's the smaller things that mattered. Integrating the housing with, with what is to come of the old mill buildings. This project was actually 150,000 square meters. So only and only if you feel that you are up for the challenge, should you actually go ahead. And trust me, if you only feel that you want to go ahead with such a big project, do go ahead. Venan, I think you can glance through the next, they're just programmatic project, right? So one of the main you can stop on this slide, the isometric. So one of the main, so this actually explains how those scales of interactions are actually broken up throughout the project. So housing at the top, commercial at the bottom. There's what sort of like an elevated ground floor area in the middle. It's somewhere on the 20th floor or so where you can actually step out. It's the smaller things that mattered. I mean, how often would you interact? How often would you go up? Bear in mind that keeping one thing I actually realized towards the end of my project was the fact that offices are there means that those spaces are going to be closed from 5 p.m. to 9 a.m. So half your building is going to be dead half of the time. So what kind of programs can I do to liven it up? Should it be livened up? And there's a lot of self-introspection that you go on with as you progress with the project. The next slide, Vedant. Right, so standard plans, sections, elevations, and all sorts of things. Fundamentally, this is also what happens at the ground floor. Obviously, yeah, Vedant, you can stop on this slide. Thanks. Yeah, great. So even when it came to the plan, factors of adaptability and one part about my research was why do buildings become obsolete? Why do high-rise buildings become obsolete, and what happens when they do? So all of my floor plates are interchangeable. You can have multiple variations, and that's actually seen in the lower diagrams on the right, that you can have multiple tenancies. You can take an entire floor. You can combine 4 floors depending on your needs and all sorts of things. And those things change. And when those buildings change, then only will the building actually be useful over that amount of time. 150,000 square, 15 lakh square feet over 50 years, that poses a lot of scope for doing things differently. If you can go down to the next slide, Vedant. So there's also factors, I mean, I don't think you'll be able to see right now, but a part of my project was also that although it might seem developer oriented, it is the fact that this project is, in my case, I wanted to do something that was buildable, and I wanted to do something that, even though I am doing these things like, oh, I have get-together spaces, oh, I have common spaces, I'm still within certain industry norms. So in my case, it was fitting the entire core within 30% of your floor plate area. That's also something I got from my research, and I took ahead. I think the next, you can skip through the plans that are there. Those are just plans there.
As well, we'll have to conclude in 5 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, you can just skip through them. I think there's about 5 pages of slides. Yeah, just a moment at that slide with the orange and yeah, those few colors, right? So even when it came to housing, it was a question of putting things differently, about what is it that in a project you need. So I mean, you don't have everything needing to change. You can, what about the common spaces? What are you going to do in those common spaces and all sorts of things? If you notice, these different colors are different sizes, so that it's about having, and if you go to the next slide, you'll actually see that even the larger, so even when I was designing, it was about what is it that you would need? What is it that people are needing? Bear in mind that a lot of the projects that we do design, they're going to be designed in a year or less. They're going to be executed, and people are going to live in them a while later. So market conditions, people are going to want different things. I mean, we're already talking about buzzing words like social distancing and all, which weren't existential 6 months ago, but now they're going to be driving a lot of things that we do. So Vedant, if you could go to the next slide, please. So even in this, ideas of how adaptability comes down all the way to your apartment. And so, when you start off, you're an empty nester, newlyweds, you have a first child, you want a bedroom, you want a home office. So open plans and everything works accordingly. You can alter your kitchen and all sorts of things. And if you go to the next slide, right, so that was the final product eventually. And the last, yeah, so even I think, yeah, you can stop on the slide afterwards. Right. So even in this, it's all about the technicality. Is it buildable? Is it doable? What can I do things differently? This took the question of adaptability down to the detail level. So you've seen it at the site level on how you adapt to the site, how to adapt to the site boundaries. That actually drove the shape of the project with street responses, with adjacencies, and all the way down to adaptability in the apartment, adaptability in your detail. So adaptability in this detail, this is actually a detail that was effectively used in a project in Singapore, and it's sort of juxtaposed in what can be done out here. So you can have, high-rise buildings are known for the fact that you can't open your windows at the top floors because it's too windy. So this allows you to allow the wind in, but not the rain, and eliminate the dust. So it's about taking things further to the level of what your topic demands. And I guess that's it. So yeah, thanks for that. Just a few, right.
Yeah, do we
Yeah.
have any questions for Azan? Okay then. Thanks a lot, Arzan. It was quite
Thanks for
Actually,
having me.
I wanted to ask Arzan
Yes,
Right.
naturally.
Yes. Yes, Navigator.
just a small question.
Right.
Arzan, were you um, taking the city, the existing city as a given? Is there a plan to change, not just the building? I know uh, your primary objective is to uh, modify the high rise, the skyscraper.
Right.
But is there a related objective to modify the city as well? Because
Uh,
after all, the city is made up of,
right.
hundreds and thousands of, millions of these high rises. Yeah.
Right. So the objective was to set up a prototype. Now, of course, what's happening in this project is that I have a uh, uh, massive plot size. It's, I think, 30,000 square meters or something. You don't get that across half of the skyscrapers that have been built in Mumbai. You have very, very small and tight spaces. So that leaves less area of exploration. It wasn't the primary objective to create, to adapt the ever-changing city with that, but it was that if I could do things differently, if I could do things in that way at that scale, what would that be?
Okay. And is there an underlying intent to modify the bylaws?
There was one bylaw regulation that I did flaw. I didn't flaw, but specifically, consciously, I decided not to take that ahead, and that was to prove a point. So I believe it's section 33(7) under the DCR that states that if you are building on a mill land, you have to divide the land and give certain amount to the government, give certain amount and build a housing to which you are going to later give to MADA, and accordingly you will get extra FSI on 1/3 of your plot. So you are in essence bifurcating your plot. So if your plot is of a very vague shape and it can't be bifurcated, then the project's not feasible. That's something I challenged in this, and I was able to get, I believe, 50% more green space. I was able to actually allocate space that people would use in different. So at the master planning level, I was able to integrate things, and I was able to use, so even gardens, lawns, all sort of things. You can call them whatever you like, but you're able to use those open spaces as 24/7 public spaces. Like I mentioned, no compound walls, no lock after 5 p.m., after sunset, nothing. You can use them throughout the time. So yes, that was one conscious decision. I'm sorry I didn't mention that earlier.
Well done.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, sir. Thank you a lot, Arzan. We'll move on to our final speaker for the day.
Thanks for having me.
We now have Nikhil Manya. His thesis is titled as Compact, Revitalizing the Act of Community Living in the Industrial Cluster of Morbi. The thesis intends to address the issue of the migrant factory workers in the industrial cluster of Morbi by developing a housing scheme and providing public amenities. The classification of the workers is studied on the basis of their family size, lifestyle, etc. Further on, the intent of the program is to foster interaction between these workers working in different factories within the same vicinity. The program is envisioned as a prototype which can be replicated within the ceramic cluster. Nikhil, we will request you to take over.
Yeah. So I believe someone's going to share the screen because I'm still having that
Yeah.
problem.
Nikhil,
Yes.
just a minute. Yep.
Yeah.
Can you see the screen?
Yeah. Okay. So the quality has deteriorated, but anyways, okay. So I mean, I've already gone through all of this before, but okay, I'll just give a quick brief through again. Sorry for the problems that were before. So as the name suggests, compact, we're talking about the act of community living in the industrial cluster of Morbi, and the term itself suggests that we're looking at low-cost housing, we're looking at sustainable housing, we're looking at housing for the workers of Morbi. So yeah, you can go to the next slide. So so just to give all of you all a brief of what Morbi is, it's a small town that's located in Gujarat. It's located, it's well connected with Jamnagar and Rajkot. And actually, in the past 20 or in the past 30 years, you can say it has become the ceramic hub of India. So again, like all the slides that are out here are just what I had presented in my thesis. So of course, there'll be a lot of data that is not required right now for you all to know or for you all to see. So again, just a brief about Morbi is that it's located in it's located in seismic zone 4. So I mean, for that was always a back consideration for me that okay, it's located in seismic zone 4. So whatever I design, I have to keep in mind that it has to be seismic friendly. And yeah, because that is, you have earthquakes happening very often there. Okay, so the next slide. So yeah, so before actually getting into doing something in Morbi, I started researching on the internet of what Morbi is. So some of y'all might have the question, and this was a question that was asked to me in the jury also, of why did you select this particular site? So the reason being is that it's my ancestors used to stay out there before, about 40, 50 years ago, and now I only visit it for religious purposes. But yeah, when back in the first year or second year when I visited it, that's when I actually saw that okay, you have a lot of ceramic enterprises out here. So I mean, that was particularly fascinating for me back then, because I always had a perception that, you know, I'm going to my village, I'm going to my hometown, so it'll be a really small area. But actually, it was totally different. It was like this booming ceramic cluster, and as of today, it's got more than 900 factories. And the snip on your right actually shows you that, you know, more than 40% are exports to foreign countries. And you've got big manufacturers such as Simpolo, RAK Ceramics. You even have Johnson now, who's setting up a plant out there. Yeah, the next slide. Hello. Yeah. So, and while reading all of this, I came across other news articles that was talking about how migrant workers, or how in general workers, are facing problems. So yeah, the next slide. So if you just read these quotes, you'll actually see that, you know, they're being paid poor wages. There's no social security for them. They've been staying for over 10 decades. For over 10 years, but they are not getting basic things such as voting rights, or even for instance, you talk about food or water. They're not getting allowances for that. They're not getting health benefits. So that is when I got more interested and more keen on knowing of what exactly is the ground reality situation. So next slide. So, and yeah, so if you just look at the growth of this cluster, you see that from 2005 to 2014, the industrial part of it has actually grown. And when you look at the proposed part of it, you see that, okay, this is going to be a nightmare, because of course you want industrial development, but you want industrial development which is also benefiting the people who are working out there or the people who are staying out there. So yeah, next slide. So that's when my thesis was actually getting more and more detailed out, that okay, I need to do something for the factory workers out there, rather than having ideas, okay, that bring in or revive an old art form, or because it is ceramics, so revive some old ceramics, or set up an expo center which becomes more of which is used once a year probably, and is used for business purposes. But my idea was to do something for the people who are actually facing a problem on a daily basis. So yeah, you can again skip through these slides. These just talk about how migration what is the scenario of migration in India. Then again, what is the impact of migration, the impact of urbanization. Yeah, next slide. And then finally you come on to one point where I was trying to justify of why I'm taking Gujarat. And then when you look on your right, you actually see that okay, in Rajkot you've got the maximum people working in Morbi. And again, the bottom right pie chart tells you that okay, it's mainly in the construction area and in the electrical area. So Morbi is basically known for manufacture of ceramics as well as manufacture of wall clocks. So you've got Ajanta and you've got these players, they all have factories out there. So, but however, Ajanta, so the electrical department is more of organized, but whereas if you look at the ceramic department, that is not organized at all. Next slide. So yeah, this was just a graphic that was to show my intent, that on the right you actually have the old town of Morbi, and on the left you've got a booming ceramic cluster. So and you've actually got a bridge like this that is used by pedestrians out there. So this was just a way of me showing that okay, that the old town acts as a gateway to the migrants to move to the ceramic cluster. Next slide. So yeah, so what you see in the middle out there is actually the old Morbi city, and what you see on your right is actually the ceramic cluster. So you see how far spread the ceramic cluster is and how small the town of Morbi is. And within the ceramic cluster, you actually see that these workers are actually. So yeah, these are just some aerial shots of what the cluster is to give you all an idea of what Morbi actually is, because this particular town has never been documented, or at least uh, I have visited SEPT, I have visited a lot of colleges in Mumbai also, but I haven't found a thesis on Morbi till date. So yeah, that's why you'll find like that's why I found that these photos were necessary to be shown. Next slide. Yeah, you can still go next. So finally, the research question was that how can architecture play an important role in improving the quality of life of the migrant factory workers? This was before I actually went on site to see what the ground reality is. So this was during when I was making my black book. So yeah, next slide. So this is all first-hand data that is generated by me on site. So basically, I tried to classify workers based on what their sex was and what their age is. Then I also tried to classify workers on basis of their skill. So what you see right. So basically, I was trying to justify one step after the other. That mainly you've got a maximum. The worker age group is between 21 to 40. So they're all young people who are working in, and it is the cluster is now dominated by unskilled workers. So you do not like about, if you say 40 years ago you had skilled workers, because that time you didn't have such technology for manufacturing tiles or for manufacturing ceramics, but now that is totally changed. So the work group that dominates it is now unskilled workers. Next slide. So then again, the next classification was by the place of residence. So on surveying, I found out that maximum workers, they stay in factory quarters or in rented houses, and you find that most of them stay. So they stay in 3 to 4 major categories. They either stay with the nuclear families, or they stay with an extended family, or they stay alone. But you've got maximum people, they actually shift with their families out here. So usually you've got one person who is the breadwinner of the family, and then you've got the other three people who are just staying and doing ancillary jobs. Next slide. So yeah, this is again all first-hand information gathered by me. So this was a residence of a worker at Madhav Pottery. So you actually see the quality of space. Like, they do not have attached toilets, but they have toilets that are about 1 to 2 kilometers away. And again, there's very poor light and ventilation. And yeah, so then again, there's no services as such provided. The kitchen and the bedroom can be flipped as per their requirement. But yeah, at times you want that flexibility, but again, it's kind of hazardous also. So there is no planning as such, but these are just rooms that are just allocated to them on a random basis, irrespective of the family sizes. Next slide. So again, this is another, like you see, this was about 5 people staying in a room that is barely 3 meters by 3 meters. And in that you've got a small service cubicle out there that is used for washing utensils and clothes and etc. And so what you see on your left is actually how each of the factory quarters look like. They're located at the corner of the factory, and they just stacked one next to each other. And because you've got a low-rise development, so they usually range from ground to first floor only. Next slide. Again, this is another factory that I visited. You can just skip this also. Again, same thing you see. Then this is again, so again, you can skip this slide again. So these are the different typologies of the houses that I documented out there. So this is a rented residence. So the rented residence did not even have toilet facilities. So there was actually open defecation that was taking place. So, and for such a residence that's barely 3 meters by 4 meters, they used to pay around 300 to 400 rupees rent per month. Next slide. And so on the contrary, this is a private residence of a potter. So till now, whatever I showed you all was actually that a housing unit or the housing typology for unskilled factory migrant workers. Whereas this was a guy who was born and brought up in Morbi. So you see the difference in his house, that he's got proper services, there's planning. It's a typical house that what you see in Gujarat like. So next slide. So this was just a comparative analysis of what the living conditions of these workers are. So from this, my thesis or my dissertation was going to now address the migrant workers who are staying out here, because they're like the thesis finally concluded that their living conditions are very poor and there is no interaction between them. So there's a need to address that. Next slide. So these are just some site images of what the cluster looks like during the day and the night. Next slide. So these are some images of what private residences within the cluster look like. So again, next slide. So yeah, this was a very important analysis for me. So so this was an inverse figure and ground analysis that basically shows empty pockets within the industrial cluster. So what you see in white is actually a built form, but what you see in black is actually empty pockets. So what happens is that whenever an industrial cluster, someone wants to establish a factory, they just select a piece of land. Okay, so what is happening is that as the ceramic cluster grows radially, you've got negative pockets that are left behind because they're too small, and you cannot have they cannot accommodate factories, so they just end up as dumping grounds. So that was a potential area for me to tap and me to say that, okay, this is my area where I want to demonstrate my proposal. Next slide. So again, this is just a graphic showing that the negative spaces between the factories can be used as potential community interaction spaces. So what happens is that say you have a group of 5 to 10 factories in the vicinity, you've got a lot of negative space. You house those workers within those negative spaces so that that they're connected to the factory premises. Also, there is social interaction between them also. And at the same time, what happens is that there's a concept of eyes on the street during the night or throughout the day also. So this was just a graphic showing that how negative spaces can be used. to house the migrant factory workers. Next. So again, these were potential sites. So these are all actually negative spaces that are left between factory premises. So out of which, next slide. So out of which I selected this one particular site, and I studied what are the number of, next slide, sorry. So actually, I studied the figure and ground analysis, and when you see the existing land use, you actually see that is dominated by industrial, but actually it's not visible in this. But you've actually got very small residential areas. Those are actually the factory quarters. So the idea was to shift all of them to a common area. That's my particular site. So yeah, next slide. So this is just a design brief where I'm saying that, the main function is to accommodate a housing facility. The second part is where you introduce a public amenity, so it improves interaction. So next slide. So because it's a housing project, I wanted to inculcate ideas that have been already existent in Morbi. So ideas in terms of, you use elements. So elements such as, you've got streets, plains, otlas, you've got terraces. These are all aspects which you see in Gujarat. These are inculcated in Gujarat. Over the years, they are there out there. So these were some ideas which I wanted to take forth ahead with me. So yeah, next slide. So again, these are some design strategies. So how streets act as an important interaction area. Next slide. Then again, how plinths and otlas act as important connection spaces or important communal interaction zones. Next slide. Same with how steps and staircases. So they actually improve the concept of eyes on street, and they also act as a connecting member. Next slide. And this is finally how terraces also act as an important communal interaction zone. So finally, next slide. So yeah, next slide. So taking into account all of these aspects, I tried to. So this is just diagrams of how my site started getting developed. So it's almost a 27,000 square meter site, and so I was going to introduce two public amenity buildings, as you can see. It'll be there on the next slide, actually. So yeah, I was going to introduce public amenity buildings and housing buildings. So this is all just about the design now. I'm really sorry I wasn't able to, share the PDF that I had made for you all because of technical errors. So this is actually what I had presented in my thesis. Yeah, you can just go to the next slide. So this was the master plan showing the layout of, so I actually divided the housing into clusters, and I had an arterial road. So that would act as a bypass also at the same time. And there were two public amenity buildings located in the middle. The one was a schooling facility and one was a vocational training facility. Next slide. So again, the design concept was that you take a unit, you convert that unit into a module, and finally that module, when you repeat it, it becomes into a cluster. Next slide. So yeah, these were just, this is all just about the design, how I took a 3 by 3 by 3 meter module, because I had to take into consideration design. It had to be low cost, and at the same time, it had to cater to the seismic zone 4 requirements. And at the same time, I was also looking at the concept of incrementation. Yeah, next slide. So yeah, again, this is the concept of how I actually develop my module, or how, the hierarchy of spaces in the module. So, and what you see on your top right is actually the user group. So as I've already mentioned before, that I was talking about a joint family, a nuclear family, an extended family, and a single user. So for the single user, dormitories were proposed, and for the others, you had these housing modules which had the scope of incrementation. Next slide. So yeah, again, these are design strategies explained. You can just browse through this. Next slide. So yeah, next slide. So these are the different types of modules that I had actually designed. So it ranged from a one room incremental, a one room non-incremental, to a two, or to a one room fully incremental, and a two room incremental also. Next slide. So yeah, again, I've just tried to explain one module. There was about 7 different categories. Next slide. And yeah, these were the dormitories that were proposed for single users. Next slide. And since I've already mentioned that there was a scope of incrementation, so I tried using structural members. I tried using, structural members to define or to allow incrementation. So if you actually see the previous slides, you will see that there were pergolas that were proposed at certain units. So the idea was that so you can place Mangalore tiles on them and you can have so there is incrementation capability. Next slide. So yeah, this is just an incrementation plan. Next slide. So yeah, in addition to the housing scheme and the public amenity buildings, I had also proposed public amenities such as, because this is almost like a township. So you require maybe a clinic, you require, uh, you require, so the name was called Vishramalaya because you have a dedicated area for stalls, you have like public toilets, you have Ayurvedic clinics, you've got normal clinics, you've got society offices, etc. So these were actually located. So next slide. And then, so the idea was also to how you inculcate services and you introduce these Vishramalayas within them. So you're actually serving two functions at the same time. Next slide. And this was the master plan. So yeah, as you can see that you have an arterial road that is spreading throughout the site, and it's you got housing clusters all around, and they directly connected with the existing road. So the idea was that in future that these proposed arterial roads become a part of the cluster only, because it's that was the idea. Next slide. You can just browse through these because these are just plans. So actually my site was too big, so I had to divide it into different plans. Next slide. You can just go, keep on going. I'll tell you when to stop. Yeah, next slide. Just keep on going. So yeah, this was an just hold wait here. So so this was a detailed layout of a ground floor cluster. So what you see on your top left is actually the Vishramalaya that I'm talking about, and what you see everywhere else is the housing cluster, and what you see in the middle is actually a dormitory. So I was trying to I was trying to bridge all the different category of people together. So you have, when you talk about a single person staying together, is well connected with a nuclear family or with a joint family, and they all and it's a very open layout. So you got it's you can either drive through or you can walk through anywhere. Next slide. Yeah, so this is again the incremental layout. So what you see highlighted in dark orange is actually when incrementation takes place. Those will actually change into potential small shops, or they can be added bedrooms or something like that. So yeah, next slide. Yeah, you can still keep on going now. So this is all just design. Next slide. So this is all just design. So this is a ground floor exploded axo. Again, this is the first floor axo. This is the roof axometric view. And this is what happens post incrementation, what you see highlighted in yellow. So actually at the terrace level also a connection is formed once incrementation takes place. Next, you can continue again. Next. These are just sections showing, you can just skip through all of these. Yeah, you can keep on going. Yeah, there's probably 10 more slides. You just keep on going. So yeah, just hold on at these views. So the idea was, again, as I told you, Vishramale. So these are potentially strategically decided and located at corner junctions. So, they foster interaction and they've got public amenities. So at the same time, an eyes of the street concept is also maintained. Next slide. So yeah, this is, I was trying to inculcate the features of what a typical village or a town in Gujarat looks like. So I hope you're able to understand. And finally, just hold on to the terraces part. So this idea was how the terraces act as a communal interaction zone. So yeah, the idea was that you've got an industrial setting, and then in the middle out here you've got a nice residential setting. So during the evening, as when the factory shut down and it gets a little cooler, so you'll actually find all of the residents that come into the terrace, and because they're connected, they're all interacting at terrace level. So yeah, next slide. Yeah, these are the public amenity buildings. Next slide. Next. Next. And finally, when you talk about construction, so as I told you that I had to take into consideration seismic zone. So I wanted to, because I'm almost building a township, so I wanted to do precast construction. So because it's quicker, it's cheaper also, and it's feasible in the long run. So yeah, so the idea was that so this is just an exploded showing how precast columns, beams, and how the construction can happen overall. Next slide. And finally, this is what my future speculation was, that you've got a nice incremented cluster or development out here, and what the arterial roads that I have defined right now are actually, they've actually merged in with the vicinity, with the surroundings. So it is no longer just residents passing by through this road, but you've got everyone. Maybe you've got the owners of the factories, the visitors, the potential businessmen who come out here. They all start using this road. So in itself, the cluster or the proposal becomes a part of the industrial setting, and this the idea was that can be replicated throughout Morbi, everywhere. So what happens is that there is communal interaction at the worker level, but at the same time, negative spaces are being actively used. And so yeah, that's all that I have to say. I'm really sorry that there was a lot of problem with some technical errors, but yeah, this is my thesis. Yeah.
Do we have any questions for Nikhil?
I just wanted to know if there was an existing built fabric that was present on site, and what was the response to it. As you are saying, this could be replicated as a thing. So wouldn't it be like a clean slate thing on a existing fabric, or how have you responded to the existing site fabric?
So as I told you that the site right now, in today's date, is a barren land where ceramic wastes are dumped on it. Okay, and it is, if you actually, if possible, can you scroll up to the site development part? It's, I think, on slide number. It's slide number 15 or something. If you could scroll up out there, I'll explain Om's concern. Slide number 38. Yeah, this is fine. So when you look at stage one, so that is the existing scenario of the slide. You've actually got a lot of debris dumped around, but still it is potential. It is used by people as a thoroughfare. Okay, it's typically you got weed, and you got small trees, and you got a lot of debris dumped in, but people use it as a thoroughfare. And so the idea was that to keep that thoroughfare intact, but develop around it. So as such, the idea is that you create a thoroughfare, and you keep the existing movement. You do not block that movement, but you just formalize it.
No,
So
my question is related to on a larger context of Morbi, like not on at the site level, but at a larger contextual level. The responses of the elements are seen, but what about the overall? Like, is there any relation to the build form that you have? Like, I would like to see if there are some photos of the existing build that is on site, Vaisa.
okay. So I don't have any like of those right now, because but so the idea was only that those design strategies that I showed you are actually of Morbi. So that axonometric view that you see is actually a typical development of Morbi. So I don't have photos and such as of now, but that gives an idea. So I actually took in those elements rather than just taking the character of those houses. I took in the elements.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Do we have any more questions for Nikhil? I guess there are no more questions. So firstly, I want to thank all the four speakers for joining in today. So Sagar, Anisha, Nikhil, and Arzan, thanks a lot for being part of Thesis Symposium Session 1. Secondly, I would like to apologize for all the technical errors that have happened, and we'll surely rectify them for upcoming sessions. So we have our second session, which is scheduled on next Saturday, that is 5th of December. The time remains the same, which is 11 a.m. onwards, and with a different set of speakers. So the details will be out soon. Stay tuned. Thanks a lot, everyone, for joining in today.